Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our Green Communities webinar. Today, I'm very excited to have two wonderful panelists to talk about zero net energy. My name is Joanne Becerra, and first I want to talk to you a little bit about the Green Communities program. And hang on, we're just going to advance the slides. Okay. Those of you who aren't familiar with the Green Communities program, we act as a hub for all energy information for 351 cities and towns. You do not need to be a green community to receive our services. You can have access to our Mass Energy Insight and our website, and we help provide technical assistance to all cities and towns, regardless of whether they're a green community. We have a website that's chock full of information, and those of you who do not get our electronic e-blast, you can sign up by the website on the bottom of your screen. We have 4 regional coordinators that are housed in DEP offices throughout the state. If you're not familiar with them, they are a wonderful resource to meet with your community on anything energy related. In the Western office, we have Jim Barry. In the Northeast office, we have Neil Duffy. In the Lakeville office, we have Seth Pickering. And in Central Mass, we have Kelly Brown. This webinar is being recorded, and it will show up on our website in about 48 hours. If you find a slide that is of particular interest, there is a camera icon on the top right-hand side of your screen. You could click on that, and a screenshot of the slide will be taken, and you can save it. In addition, there is a Q&A icon on your screen. Feel free to type in questions as we go along. We did allow for some time at the end of the presentations for questions and answers. In the case that we cannot get to all the questions, we will be posting the questions and answers on the website along with the webinar. Next slide. Before our panelists start with their presentations, I just wanted to make folks on the webinar aware that the Green Communities program will be offering their municipal energy technical assistance grants in the next month or two. And specifically, we do support zero net energy planning and assessment through these grants. So I just wanted to make you aware of that we do provide some help with that. And you'll learn more about what these things are from our presentations. So first, we have a poll question. Is your community planning on constructing a new building in the near future? We just wanted to get a sense of where people were in their new building planning processes.
All right, with 53% of the votes in, we have 100% for yes.
Oh,
wow.
Excellent. We have a captive audience. That's great to hear.
That's great.
Okay. Next slide. Okay, what I'm going to do is pass the microphone over to Paul Ormond. He's our energy engineer here at DOER, and he works in our energy efficiency division.
Hello, how is everyone today? Thank you for joining this afternoon. My name is Paul, and I have really a story. I guess you might call it a case study. So let's go to the next slide. This is the story about the Nelson Place School in Worcester, Massachusetts. Maybe there are some people from Worcester on the line, in which case all I can say is you should be extremely proud of your awesome project. This is a standout project that's an example for all to follow of the future, I think, of how to do schools and other types of municipal buildings. So I call this, the subtitle is a zero energy story, but there's a better subtitle, which perhaps is, moving to the next slide. It might be called Zero Energy Within Reach. And we could be a little bit funny about it. We could actually subtitle it Nelson Place School, zero energy within reach, comma, but you may not know it yet. And that's actually, you'll see why I say that as we advance through the story. But let's go to another poll question. And the question is, you can check one or all or none. Zero energy is usually expensive, so check if that's true in your experience. High maintenance and complicated. So again, you can check one, all, or none.
Okay, with about 63% of the votes in, we have 58% checking expensive, 25% high maintenance, and 75% complicated.
Right. All right. That's not unanticipated. So I mean, that is very consistent with a lot of people's experience, and that is the case because the go-to strategy for doing a zero energy project in the past has been to embrace more systems, unusual systems, complicated systems in order to achieve, high levels of efficiency. And what I would say though is the news is good in that people have figured this out a lot in the last 5 years. Go to the next slide. And so I'm happy to say that based on what we see here at the state of projects that are being built now, we actually see the opposite is true on all these, and that's because people are using different go-to strategies than they have in the past. So we can safely say that we see examples of zero energy projects that are in fact maintenance friendly, even more so than code buildings, less complicated, and they may not necessarily cost the same, but they don't necessarily cost a lot more. And they're, in my experience, usually worthwhile over time, which is consistent with the municipality's, ownership of a building over a long term. So they do result in cost savings. So that brings us back to our story, Nelson Place School. This is a 100,000 square foot middle school for about 500 students. Recently constructed. This has now been in service for about a year or two. This beautiful picture there from Fontaine Brothers, who was the contractor. The next slide. So when this project was first being designed about 5 or 7 years ago, a design team got together and were asked by the city to investigate whether this project could be a zero energy school. And what's different about this design team, in addition to being absolutely awesome in their fields, all this team, this is an integrated design team. So we have the architect, the mechanical engineer, the HVAC people, consultants, the owner, the utilities consultants to explore math-save stuff. All of those team members were involved from day zero as a team, instead of the usual process of designers at the design phase, and then it kicked over to the contractors, and then there's lots of VE, and then at the end you check in with the utilities, what kind of rebates can we get? Instead of everything done in series, everything was done in parallel. So all these team members were there at the beginning. So this team was charged with looking at zero energy and look to those go-to strategies that you would expect to go to 5 years ago, which was let's look at wind, let's look at geothermal, let's look at lots of complicated HVAC systems. And the results were something that the city was not really happy with. They looked at it and said, that sounds expensive, complicated, we're not used to those systems. And so the team, what's great about this team was they didn't step away from any commitment less of delivering a great building. They didn't say, oh, we can't be zero energy, so throw our arms up in the air and we'll build a code building. Or we'll build the building that worked for us last. They still were very committed to figuring out a way to make a great building for the school. And so they stepped back and they re-examined, well, zero energy is zero energy is zero energy, whatever. what is it that we're actually trying to accomplish? What is it that we want to do? What are the values that we want to achieve? And they came up with 3 things, and there's a 4th in a moment. But they wanted the building, they wanted to achieve efficiency first, maintenance friendly, and cost effective, because the building just didn't have some sort of unlimited budget. And that integrated design team, going through multiple iterations of design processes and cost estimating as they went, even back in schematic design, the solution they came up with is the package that you see in the bottom box, which is they went with conventional stuff, the condensing boiler stuff that schools are used to, low maintenance, some displacement ventilation, energy recovery, and external shading. And then the key change they made was in the envelope. You can see that they have a wall that's 21 continuous insulation. The roof is 45 continuous insulation. At the time, code roof was 20 continuous insulation. So this envelope is literally ×2 better than what code requires. So I just want to reinforce that this building, this design team did something quite different than a code building. They didn't make this incrementally better, which is kind of what you get when you do LEED something. And they didn't go to the same old design processes that were the usual go-to strategies for zero energy back then. What they went to were new strategies, and primarily a ×2 better envelope for the next one. And so you ask yourself, well, is that cost effective? And the answer is absolutely. And that's because it's absolutely going to cost you more to have an envelope that's twice as good. But this is the benefit of an integrated team, because the integrated team was modeling the performance of that building with the better envelope, the ×2 envelope. And then they were taking a look at the HVAC systems that they actually needed. And what they found was they could downsize their HVAC system equipment and actually eliminate systems like perimeter radiation. And because they're all on one design team, they're able to hand that off to the contractor, again, back in the early design phases, and say, hey, it turns out our HVAC systems can be smaller. Is there any cost deducts? So under, zero energy generation 1 with the old go-to strategy, everything was just a cost add, cost add, cost add. In this case, with the strategy of more envelope, this cost add of envelope, but this cost deduct of HVAC. So that's how they resulted in a net only a little bit more, and you can see the concept there in the plot there. So the go-to strategy of version 2 with lots of envelope is an effective strategy if your mission is low maintenance, because then you're allowing the system of the wall and the windows to do all the heavy lifting for you, and those systems have no moving parts that can break. So that's the way you want to go if your value is low maintenance. So the 4th priority was to maximize the use of the roof for renewable energy. And the city of Worcester was very experienced at this because they've been working to maximize their rooftop solar on all their existing and new construction buildings. And in this project, there were rooftop solar plans that were made showing where the solar PV would be way back at the schematic design. It was not an afterthought. And as a result, the HVAC systems for a middle school type building, which includes a lot of rooftop appurtenances, were consolidated to certain areas, and they didn't sort of unnecessarily clutter their roof with HVAC equipment, allowing a lot of contingent type space, contiguous type space for PV. So in this case, Worcester was able to put the PV on, buy the systems. In your building, you may, your building project may not have budget for the PV systems, but that's, it would make perfect sense still, though, to allocate the space for some future PV, even if you weren't going to build it in the first go around. So the building was built with the Zero energy was kind of put into a file, and the priorities became efficiency, cost effectiveness, low maintenance. And that team then went to new go-to strategies of times to envelope. That building was constructed, the PV was built, and at the end of it all, we then had a chance to go back and take a look and say, well, how is this performing? And we took a look at the energy consumption and the PV production, and we ran those as-built numbers through the Department of Energy's method for definition of zero energy. And guess what? It turns out that the building was actually pretty darn close to zero energy after all. And that makes perfect sense, because it turns out when you do your times two envelope, you're barking up the same tree as the right approach to achieve a zero energy project. So, you know, looking back, the generation 2 type zero energy as opposed to generation 1 type zero energy is quite effective. And you're going, you know, this is that story, you know, you might be closer to zero energy than you may ever know, especially with the kind of generation 2 strategies. So to put that into perspective, if they were to build this school to code, the school would consume about 8.5 million BTUs of source energy per year. And this school took advantage of mass save incentives to do that times 2 envelope, some improvements to the HVAC, and they're able to cut that energy consumption by about 1/3. And then they're able to do the rooftop PV to kind of take it almost the rest of the way down. So that way that the school that was actually built uses an energy consumption that's way down there. And again, much closer to zero energy school than anyone ever thought possible, and certainly not even close to a code school. So I just want to stress, this is not incrementally better school. This is a school that is off the charts better than they would have gotten if they built it as code school. And again, this team wasn't even trying to get to zero energy as a specific goal. It was what they ended up with by pursuing the most cost-effective strategies they could think of. So think about that in the next time you're doing your zero energy school. So let's go to the next slide. Or any building, not just school. So that's a great picture of the kids. They got a great school to look forward to. I just want to show one more postscript. I think the slide's here. Oh yeah, so the school, after they learned that they were that close to zero energy, it turns out they were already planning a small parking area canopy PV system. And they did in fact size that to close the rest of the gap. So this now is a totally zero energy school. I'm not sure if that PV is built at this time or if that's still being designed, but it will meet zero energy at that point. So kind of like everything was accomplished at the end of the day. Next slide. 8-year payback, by the way. Let's go to the next slide. So I have just 2 more slides, and then we'll hand it over to Sean to give us a go through on mass save incentives for energy efficiency. So this is a screenshot of a spreadsheet tool that the DOER built last year that provides a way for an owner of any sort, city planners, architects, to examine the basic framework for how close would your building be to zero energy, what would it need to do to be zero energy, how much can we get out of the solar system for a given roof size, and it maps in the most basic things. It literally takes about 15 minutes to come up with kind of all the key parameters that you'd want to know and ask of your consultants, and it kind of helps you know what to expect. So if you're interested in something like that, then my contact information is there, and I can send you the spreadsheet. This is a screenshot of it, and give you a little tutorial of how it works. And then, you know, the next slide. I just thought I'd point out, too, the American Institute for Architecture, AIA, just released this week a zero energy planning tool as part of their Code Zero efforts. That does the exact same thing as our spreadsheet. It's actually it uses the same inputs and kind of engines. And what's nice about this is all web-based, so it's something that's available that you don't have to have, work a spreadsheet to do. So it's another nice tool for you to. That's the URL right there. So So thank you so much for sharing my story, and I'll hand it over to Sean at this point.
Great, thank you, Paul. So just wanted to run you through a few things and how our Mass Save incentives will be able to assist you on your goals if you know, a zero net energy or a zero net energy ready project is part of your goal. You know, just to really emphasize a lot of re-emphasize a lot of what Paul said. You know, the mindset was really to jump first to those systems and those energy design, different areas and different characteristics that go into the design for a building. You know, they think, oh, we're going to need a really super expensive, you know, variable refrigerant flow system and tons of renewables. And there are ways that you can really break this down into little buckets to, you know, take a look at each piece and see where you can get your wins and drive down your energy use intensity in these different areas. So I have a kind of a list here of some different areas that we typically look at when we go through our design technical assistance and design studies through the Mass Save program. And, you know, I have passive elements listed there first, like we saw at the Nelson Place school. You know, if you don't take a look at how you can reduce your loads in the building passively first, then you're already going to be behind and be trying to make up those losses for meeting your goals with systems and trying to correct those with systems. So those first two work hand in hand, but you know, in my experience in doing energy modeling, not only with Eversource, but in you know, previous occupations of my career, if you don't take a look at a lot of those passive elements first, smart glazing strategies, how you orient the building on the site if it is true new construction, you know, reducing the size of the floor plate so you can get 100% daylighting and take advantage of natural light and implement some daylight controls, you're really leaving up to maybe 25 or 30% of the potential savings of the building on the table. So fixing that load, then bringing it down with smart systems, and then you know, introducing those renewables to be able to get you to your zero net energy goal for your city is great. And then obviously the last missing piece there is operations. You can design a great building, it can be constructed very well, but operations is a very, very important piece to make sure that you know, your new building keeps humming along. So a few quick things I just want to note. I'm sure some of you have been through our Mass Save programs with Eversource or with National Grid. All of the program administrators for the Mass Save program are all kind of moving towards a common application now going into 2018. So the Mass Save application portal is now live on the Mass Save website, so there's a link there for you to take a look at. If you still have some 2017 forms you know, kicking around your offices or your workspaces, there's no significant changes in the incentive levels or eligibility criteria, so you can still use those as a reference. But now we have that web page that you'll be able to walk through and kind of replicate and put a lot of that information in when you're trying to plan for your project. So we have our first poll question here. Hopefully a lot of this is a yes, but just wanted to see how familiar a lot of people are that are on the line right now with the new construction services provided by their utility in their service area.
Okay, we had about 76% of you vote, and it looks like a straight 50-50 split.
All right, well, that's great. I'm glad there's an opportunity today to talk or reintroduce and refresh those of you that are aware or have participated in the program before, and reach out to those new folks to let them know what we're doing over at Eversource and how we can help you meet your goals. So certainly, you know, a lot of these zero net energy buildings we'll be taking a look at would be through our commercial industrial new construction program. So there's a few different things that falls into that. There's the true ground-up new construction, so you have a green site that would be, true new construction. Or if there's a major renovation and addition, not necessarily fits with, tenant fit-outs, maybe a little bit for some administrative buildings for some municipalities. But if you have a school or a library where you're going to be doing a major renovation and also maybe adding on some square footage in that project, that would be a code-triggering event, and that would be a new construction project as well. And then there's also some new equipment at the end of that useful life. So kind of in a high-level view, and then we'll kind of zoom down in the programs in a little bit. But we'll take a look at creating an energy model that will calculate some savings on a holistic basis, taking all of those great design technologies that your architects and your engineers are putting in, those smart glazing strategies, efficient HVAC systems, take those and compare them to a code level baseline building based on the Energy Code, Law of the Land right now, IECC 2015 in Commonwealth. And then incentives would be able to be provided, and we'd be able to support on a few different fuel basis on electric and gas, any savings above and beyond what is calculated in that baseline. So there's a few different pathways that you can go through for the new construction program. So for zero net energy building, we definitely want to get you on that whole buildings approach for those buildings above 20,000 square feet. If it's below 20,000 square feet, we do have a systems approach that there are some custom calculations that we would do, but it wouldn't be a whole building model like I just described. So, but certainly the majority of renovations and new construction projects in your town is probably going to be between 20 and 100,000 square feet. So there are a few different paths. Certainly, if you have some schools like Nelson Place, that would be kind of over 100,000 square feet, and we can kind of talk about the differences between those. They're incentivized a little different, and the programs run a little differently. So there are some intricacies that we'll get into. So again, the emphasis on an integrated design and really, getting everybody to the table early. We do offer two different levels of incentives. So you'll see a timeline on the bottom there, and you have your pre-design when you're really trying to think about, okay, we have this need for this school, and you talk to an architect and hire owner's project manager, and they start to come up with a program of for this building to satisfy your town's needs. So we really want to get into that integrated design, which would really start just before schematic or even before schematic design, and then goes through design development. We would still be able to support your project if it was getting into construction documents, but not to the same level that we would if it was in that earlier in the integrated design. And I can't stress enough, doing those multiple iterations and having that time to really take a look at all the options on the table and point the compass needle in the right direction and make smart decisions early would be able to be a big help to meet your goals. So it's a little bit of a breakdown just for those new folks to let you know some of the incentives that are available when we calculate that incentive for you. So any savings on the electric or gas side, it is tiered for Eversource service territory. There are some differences between the different program administrators. So that's something that if you're out in the center of the state in Worcester County, typically, just so you all know, the electric service territory for the Mass Safe program, they generally take the lead on doing the consulting and the technical assistance. So if you're in Eversource electric service territory, certainly feel free to reach out to me or some of the other folks on the new construction team, or you can always, I'm sure many of you are in touch with Mark Rooney, who's our account executive that handles the municipal sector. So there is also some design incentives. This is for integrated only. That would be paid to your design team. So there is a $3,000 stipend that's paid to the architect, and then they can distribute that to the rest of their consultants that they have as contractors, and consultants to them. So we do for our preferred vendors. So Eversource has a list of technical assistance vendors that are preferred that we kind of pre-screen and vet, so we make sure we get a consistent calculation from them, and it's a quality model that's for for our customers. So we do a 75% cost share of those studies that go through our program. So, that would be capped at $20,000 as well. And typically the studies are less than that, but that's the cost share that we would be able to do for the energy savings calculation. So then that design team incentive also must meet a minimum threshold of greater than 10% for the design team to be able to get their incentive, which if everybody's here interested in zero energy buildings, it's going to be way more than that. So this is a little bit of a breakdown of how those incentives are paid to the design team lead. Typically the architect. Sometimes it's the mechanical engineer, but typically it's the architect that's working and the lead designer on the project. So this is all for the large buildings, which primarily would apply to schools, mostly for municipalities. We also have a small buildings path. Again, early engagement is very critical. So we do have a number of TA vendors, but we have Eversource has a bench of 4 pre-selected vendors that we would use for the small building path. So be able to meet with you very early on, run through an energy charrette, get all the stakeholders around the table, and talk about how we can put your zero net energy goals into your project. As a service to you, our vendor would also be available for any consultation and do a mid-design review to get a third-party review of the design development drawings, making sure that you're still on that path, and if there's anything that needs to be corrected to meet those goals, there's still some time to remedy that. So the same customer incentive tiers as I showed you before for the large buildings path, if the project is modeled, which a lot of them are and would be for zero net energy projects. And again, similar to the large buildings path, there would be that design team incentive that would be available. So I want to do kind of a quick recap and just kind of an example about, since we talked about the Nelson Place School, about how we would fit into the MSBA process, which I'm sure many of you are familiar with. So MSBA process is on top there. They have different modules that they go through. So, the jurisdiction would express a statement of interest to the MSBA and looking for funding. So go through some eligibility period and look and make sure that it fits into the goals. So then in Module 2, they'd form a project team. So this is typically where the owner's project manager and everybody gets, the design team gets formed. And then this goes through the feasibility study, which I'm sure some of you have been through, where it's okay, well, are we going to renovate, put an addition on an existing school? Is there another site that makes sense? But you go through a lot of that. And then as you get a little further along, the guaranteed maximum price for the project and the funding is locked in from the Commonwealth for your project. So I just want to emphasize that when you're forming that project team, that's really when we want to initiate and start the Eversource process. There is sometimes, even though projects can cash flow better and it would help pay down the bonds sooner, once you get locked in with the MSBA process, it's very, very hard to add technologies and see how the incentives available through MassSave would be able to help you reach your goals. So we want to be able to, as you're getting started in that feasibility study, see how the MassSave incentives, and do that charrette and make sure that they would be able to help you meet your goals. So that way we can get to our step 4 and get a pre-approval letter in your hand. So when you're getting into the construction, you know the commitment that would be available from Eversource or National Grid for your project. So one other quick thing, since I have the ear of a lot of the municipalities that are in here, we're rolling out from a DPU order, Department of Public Utilities order, a electric vehicle make-ready program, which is just getting started, and it's a very, very ambitious goal of deploying a number of level 2 and also some DC fast charging stations throughout Eversource's electric service territory in the Commonwealth. So this will be going on for the next 5 years. And it is, $45 million program just for Eversource in our electric service territory. There is going to be another DPU order that is going to be coming out, if it's not out already, for National Grid's service territory. That's going to be a very similar program, but it's kind of separate pots of money that are allocated for this program from the DPU. So, you know, what's going on here is what we're going to be doing is the Make Ready program will shift a lot of the capital costs and expense of the charging infrastructure from like the site host, which would be you, to Eversource. So we would use these funds to help pay for a lot of these electric vehicle charging stations. So typically, you know, Eversource would be able to provide that new service from the transformer to the utility meter, and then that's really where our commitment and our work would stop. Then from the panel to the rest of the, you know, thing that plugs in, the plug that goes into the electric vehicle, you would have to have an electrician and incur that cost. So certainly, if you have an open parking lot that you're looking to do this, you know, there could be some trenching and site restoration work that would be needed to lay the conduit and pull the conductors from that transformer or a panel over to the electric vehicle. So under the Make Ready program, Eversource would be able to contribute from the primary service all the way to the whips that would come out of the pad or out of a panel right to the site where you're going to be parking that electric vehicle, and then you'd have the choice of a number of EV charging manufacturers, depending on who you'd like to use. Maybe you already have some implemented and you have a certain flavor that you like. We are just finished up an RFP process to pre-qualify some vendors and get some preferred pricing for a handful that be able to hopefully alleviate some of the procurement process on your side. So this is something that I'm going to be very heavily involved in, and hopefully you'll be able to take advantage of it. Just kind of one quick note, the program does stipulate it does need to be a new service that's pulled from an Eversource transformer. So if you have, you know, if you have a primary only account and you know, you have your own secondary transformers, it can get a little messy, but we should hopefully be able to work something out. But you know, thank you for your time, everyone. One thing that I just want to wrap up with and end with, you know, it's as Paul said earlier, and I reiterated, if zero net energy is your goal, I mean, it is something that's certainly attainable. Use the DOER planning tool if you're thinking about a new school or a new DPW garage or public safety building. And then, you know, if it does look like within reach, using a lot of these free tools, whether it's from DOER or AIA, put that ZNE is part of your goal in your RFP for design services. Make sure it's in there. Make sure that your architect and your design team knows that it's a priority when they're bidding on the project to design your building. And you should be off on the right foot. And hopefully I'll hear from you and we'll be able to help you out with some incentives through Mass Save. So that's it for me. Thank you very much.
Okay, we have some questions. So one question was your definition of net zero energy versus 100% renewable energy?
So the net zero energy is by the Department of Energy. The U.S. Department of Energy has developed some very useful guidelines on all these definitions because it can get a little confusing. So that's what we go by. So in the case of Nelson Place School, you count all of the energy that the school needs. You convert that to source energy, and then the PV production on the roof has to be equal to all that primary source energy, and that would be considered net zero energy.
Okay, second question. Does school projects include energy storage?
As far as I know, this school project did not include storage. That's a little bit before all the incentives and almost some of the technologies were sort of available. But in the future, it'll be almost universal that large PV systems will have storage because there's really good incentives coming for that combination.
Okay, third question. For the Mass Save incentives, what is the threshold for the small versus large projects?
So for the new construction program, the large buildings path would be projects over 100,000 square feet. The small buildings path would be between 20,000 and 100,000 square feet, and anything under 20,000 would be a systems approach. This is, again, just to be clear, this is for Eversource electric service territory. So if there's a different program administrator, you know, like National Grid or Cape Light Compact, they may have different breakdowns in how they do things. I know that National Grid certainly has some different breakdowns. So that's Eversource's breakdown of those thresholds for the square footages.
And that kind of leads into our fourth question, which was asking about the National Grid programs. So maybe we could tell them where they can find National Grid's info or contact. Is that MassSave or somewhere else?
Really, if you wanted to do some research and take a look, the MassSave website is the best way to go. You know, if you wanted to do some research. The lead new construction representatives for National Grid is Tracy Bestrom and Mark Stafford, depending on where exactly it is. So hopefully they've been in contact with you or not. We can maybe as we do this and send out the slides and get this on there, it can include some contact information for them as well.
Yeah.
Yes. Okay. And that's all the questions. Anybody else have a question before we log off?
All right. Well, terrific. Thank you for joining us. And as we mentioned earlier, these slides will be put on the website in about 2 days. And we will update the resource list to include National Grid representatives, as well as the MassSave website and anything else that would be helpful. So thanks again for tuning in, and have a great rest of your day.